We are living inside a meticulously crafted illusion of scarcity. You have been taught, since you were old enough to comprehend the world around you, that anything of true, enduring value takes generations to build. You have been sold a narrative that premium resources are inherently rare, that the slow, agonizing passage of time is the only way to produce strength, and that because of this manufactured rarity, you must pay exorbitant prices to the corporations that control the supply. Nowhere is this deception more glaring than in the global timber industry. It is a massive $100 billion cartel built entirely on the concept of the rotation age. In commercial forestry, whether you are dealing with pine, oak, or fir, the business model relies on a 30 to 50 year waiting game. You plant a sapling, you wait half a century, you harvest. This multi-generational timeline creates an absolute barrier to entry. It ensures that only massive corporate land trusts and heavily subsidized monopolies can afford to play the game. They hold the land, they hold the supply, and they dictate the price of the roof over your head. Now, imagine a biological anomaly that shatters this economic model overnight. Imagine an organism engineered by millions of years of evolution to produce premium, structural hardwood not in 50 years, but in 5. A tree that explodes from the soil, growing an astonishing 20 feet in a single 12-month cycle. A wood that possesses a strength-to-weight ratio so profound that, in terms of sheer structural durability and resistance to warping, it functions harder and more reliably than oak. If such a miracle existed, it would decentralize the timber monopoly. Any farmer, any landowner, any community could grow a fortune in their own backyard in a matter of 60 months. The dead and harvest cycle of the massive lumber cartels would collapse. This tree exists. It is called the Paulownia, and the modern corporate state has spent the last 70 years trying to convince you that it is nothing but a worthless, invasive weed. To understand the sheer magnitude of this biological cover-up, we must first look away from the polluted industrial forestry of modern America and look back to the ancient world. Long before the chemical companies and timber lobbyists wrote the laws that govern our land, the Paulownia was recognized for exactly what it is, an arboreal masterpiece. In ancient China, during the reign of the Han Dynasty, the Paulownia, often referred to as the Empress Tree, was considered sacred. It was not viewed as mere timber. It was a revered technological marvel of the natural world. The ancient texts, including the 11th century botanical treatise written by Chen Yu, meticulously documented its miraculous properties. According to deep-rooted cultural tradition, a Paulownia tree was planted on the exact day a daughter was born. Because of its explosive, almost supernatural growth rate, by the time she was ready to marry, the tree had matured into a massive, towering giant. It was then harvested and carved into exquisite furniture, musical instruments, and dowry chests. The Japanese revered it equally, calling it the Kiri tree. The wood was so highly prized for its impenetrable nature that it became the exclusive material for crafting the protective boxes that housed priceless samurai armor and legendary katana blades. The shogunate elevated the leaf of the Kiri tree to an imperial crest, a symbol of extreme resilience and elite status. Mythological texts stated that the legendary phoenix, the immortal bird of fire and rebirth, would only land on the branches of the Empress Tree. The ancients did not worship this tree out of blind superstition. They revered it because they understood its undeniable, hard biological science. The Paulownia is a photosynthetic powerhouse. Its massive, elephant ear-shaped leaves act as biological solar panels, capturing light and pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a rate that is 10 times higher than conventional tree species. While a standard pine tree struggles to absorb a few pounds of carbon a year, a mature Paulownia acts like a vacuum, sequestering hundreds of pounds of greenhouse gases while simultaneously exhaling massive plumes of pure oxygen. This hyper-efficient metabolism translates into shocking physical growth. A Paulownia sapling can shoot up 20 feet in its first year. By year 5, it has achieved the girth and height that would take a traditional oak or pine 4 decades to reach. But the true miracle is not just the speed, it is the physical composition of the wood itself. Modern forestry insists that fast-growing wood must be soft, weak, and practically useless for structural engineering. The Paulownia breaks this fundamental rule. Its cellular structure is an evolutionary marvel. It is incredibly lightweight, yet its interlocking grain grants it a strength-to-weight ratio that rivals the greatest hardwoods on Earth. When kiln-dried, Paulownia does not warp. It does not split. It resists rot and repels termites with a naturally occurring chemical defense system. In specific structural applications, particularly in resistance to shearing and environmental degradation, it demonstrates a functional hardness that outlasts traditional oak. But perhaps its most astonishing feature is its relationship with fire. In an era where corporate pine plantations act as massive, highly combustible tinderboxes waiting to ignite and consume entire towns, the Paulownia stands as a natural firewall. The flashpoint of conventional lumber is roughly 225 degrees Celsius. Paulownia wood does not ignite until it reaches temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius. It is nearly double the fire resistance of the timber currently holding up your house. Furthermore, the tree is functionally immortal through a process known as coppicing. When you cut down an oak or a pine, the organism dies. You must buy new seeds, prepare the soil, and start the multi-decade wait all over again. When you cut down a Paulownia at the base, its massive, nutrient-rich taproot simply pushes up a new trunk. It regenerates itself, producing another fully mature, harvestable tree in another 5 years. It can do this up to 7 times from a single root system. Plant it once, and you have a continuous supply of premium, fire-resistant hardwood for over a third of a century. By all metrics of logic, science, and economics, the Paulownia should be the absolute savior of the modern world. It is the ultimate weapon against deforestation. It is a peerless carbon sink. It is a self-regenerating source of superior building materials. So why, if you ask the United States Department of Agriculture or your local Forestry Commission, will they tell you that the Paulownia is a noxious weed that must be destroyed on site? To find the villain in this story, you simply have to follow the money. The Paulownia arrived in the United States in the mid-19th century entirely by accident. Long before the invention of styrofoam or plastic bubble wrap, Chinese merchants shipped delicate porcelain to American ports. To protect the fragile ceramics during the long, violent ocean voyages, they packed the wooden crates with the soft, fluffy seed pods of the Paulownia tree. When the crates were opened in ports from New York to Charleston, the seed pods were discarded into the wind. Quietly, harmlessly, the tree began to take root along the eastern seaboard. For decades, it was viewed as a beautiful, exotic ornamental. But following the Second World War, the American landscape changed. The military-industrial complex transitioned into the corporate agricultural complex. The housing boom created an insatiable demand for lumber, and massive corporate conglomerates began buying up millions of acres of American soil. Companies like Weyerhaeuser and Georgia-Pacific established the modern timber empire. They instituted the monoculture pine plantation, endless, sterile rows of genetically identical loblolly pine trees. This system was entirely dependent on artificial scarcity and the slow 40-year rotation cycle. The long growth period justified the high prices. It necessitated the existence of real estate investment trusts to finance the decades of dead time between planting and harvesting. The timber monopoly became a heavily financialized, unassailable fortress. But deep in the Appalachian Mountains and spreading across the coastal plains, the Paulownia was growing, and some independent farmers began to notice. They noticed that this strange tree with the giant leaves was yielding gorgeous, blonde, honey-colored hardwood in a fraction of the time it took their pine to mature. They noticed that Japanese buyers were willing to pay absolute top dollar for American-grown Paulownia logs, flying buyers over to purchase the timber directly from the rural landholders. For the American timber cartel, this was not just a curiosity, it was an existential threat. If the American public realized that they did not need to rely on the corporate 40-year pine cycle, if they realized that a superior, fire-resistant, rot-resistant wood could be grown in any empty lot in just 60 months, the bottom would fall out of the commercial lumber market. The artificial scarcity that kept lumber prices sky-high would evaporate. The entire debt-based forestry model would collapse under the weight of natural, unstoppable abundance. The corporate response was swift, highly organized, and devastatingly effective. They could not beat the Paulownia in the soil, so they defeated it on paper. Through immense lobbying power, the timber industry and its allies in the agricultural chemical sector pressured state and federal agencies to officially reclassify the Empress Tree. They stripped it of its ancient royal title and branded it with the most legally damaging term in modern botany, an invasive species. This label is a masterclass in bureaucratic weaponization. The moment a plant is declared an invasive, noxious weed, it is stripped of all legal protections. It becomes ineligible for agricultural subsidies. State forestry departments actively discourage its planting, and universities pull funding from researching its benefits. But the label was entirely hypocritical. The timber industry's own loblolly pine plantations are essentially massive, unnatural invasions that destroy local biodiversity, acidify the soil, and create dead zones where no native wildlife can survive. Yet, the pine is protected because it generates quarterly profits for the right boardrooms. The Paulownia, which actually repairs soil by dropping nitrogen-rich leaves and pulling heavy metals out of degraded land, was demonized because it was free, fast, and uncontrollable. Once the legal framework was in place, the chemical war began. The suppression of the Paulownia provided a massive new revenue stream for the agrochemical giants. Companies like Monsanto, producers of the infamous glyphosate, partnered with state agencies to eradicate the tree. Forestry departments instituted heavily funded hack-and-squirt programs. Armed with backpacks of toxic herbicides, state workers were dispatched into the woods. They would hack open the trunk of the Paulownia and inject lethal doses of triclopyr and glyphosate directly into its vascular system. Millions of taxpayer dollars were, and still are, spent poisoning a tree that absorbs 10 times more carbon than the trees they replace it with. They are chemically burning an ancient, fire-resistant hardwood in order to protect highly flammable, slow-growing, corporate pine. The sheer absurdity of the policy is matched only by the scale of the greed behind it. The propaganda campaign was incredibly successful. Today, if you walk into a university botany class or speak to a local park ranger, they will recite the corporate script perfectly. They will tell you the Paulownia is a trash tree. They will warn you that its roots spread too fast, that it outcompetes native vegetation, that it is a menace to the ecosystem. They will repeat these talking points without ever questioning the science, and without ever looking at the multi-billion-dollar corporate interests that wrote those talking points in the first place. The science was never the point. Protecting the monopoly was the point. But here is the beautiful, undeniable truth about nature. It does not care about federal designations, and it does not care about corporate quarterly earnings. The Paulownia evolved to survive the harshest conditions on the planet. It is a pioneer species, designed to grow where nothing else can, to heal broken earth, and to outpace destruction. They hacked it, they sprayed it, they poisoned its roots and outlawed its cultivation. And yet, the Empress Tree remains. If you know what to look for, you will see the ultimate irony of this story playing out right outside your window. Drive down Interstate 95 or walk along the abandoned railroad tracks of the Rust Belt. Look at the edges of the sterile, corporate pine plantations. There, rising from the neglected ditches, pushing up through the cracked asphalt of forgotten parking lots, you will see it. The massive, heart-shaped leaves. The stunning clusters of purple, bell-shaped flowers blooming in the early spring. It is growing 20 feet a year. It is regenerating itself in the toxic soil. It is quietly pulling the heavy metals from the pollution of the highway, silently capturing the carbon of 1,000 passing cars, and building a core of impenetrable, fireproof hardwood. The empire tried to bury it. They tried to convince you that this miracle of biology was nothing but a weed. They blinded you to the abundance of nature so they could sell you the illusion of scarcity. But the Paulownia is still here, waiting. It is a monument to resilience, an ancient technology perfectly suited to solve the modern crises of deforestation, wildfires, and ecological collapse. The truth is growing wildly, for free, in the margins of their concrete world. The monopoly is a fragile, 40-year lie. The Empress Tree is a 5-year revolution. The only question left is whether you will continue to believe the corporate narrative, or if you will finally see the miracle growing right in front of your eyes.